Let me show you what is referred to in the business as a complicated watch. This is by IWC, International Watch Company of Switzerland, and it's called complicated for obvious reasons. Take a look at the face. It's not just a timekeeper, it's a stopwatch. You've got the day, the date, the month, the year, a perpetual calendar, and even the moon phases. Now that's what I call complicated. Soon I'll be putting this watch on the market, but I've got to tell you that the equivalent brand new version of this costs over £36,000, and there's a very good reason for that. It's one of the best watches in the world. This one is 30 years old, so it's a vintage watch, but it's fascinating because in this business sometimes objects come into your life and they take you on journeys of discoveries. This watch is a great example. So when I bought it, it came with a receipt for a service, an overhaul. In fact, a full restoration costing over £1,700. That's great to have with any watch. However, the letter-headed receipt was from a firm called Robert Loomes in Stamford. Now this, for me, was very exciting because this is no ordinary watch repairer. This company are one of only about 3 in the whole United Kingdom that make watches from scratch to an incredibly high standard. I think their watches sell up to about £70,000 and also restore watches, of course, to a very high standard. So I made the call and I asked if I could bring the watch down, let them have a look at it, check it over again, tell me what they remember about it, and have a poke around their workshops. So come with me. Let's have a drive to Stamford and meet Robert Loomes himself on a beautiful day in Stamford, right on the River Welland. This is where his workshops are. Robert can trace his clockmaking heritage back over 300 years. Welcome to Loomes. So there it is then, Robert. Do you remember that particular watch?
Yeah, I remember it really well. And in fact, you sent me a photograph of the back of the watch first.
Yeah.
And I knew exactly which one it was just from that picture alone.
Right.
We see 1 or 2 watches a year of this level of complexity in a wristwatch.
So it's memorable because they can be a nightmare.
They're demanding, they make you scratch your head.
Yeah.
You have to go back and check through your notes to make sure you've got the right lubrication for the bits that you only work on maybe once a year, once every 2 years.
Got you, yeah.
And so, it just takes a lot longer to do.
They're very special watches, aren't they?
It's brilliantly conceived, it really is. It's a masterpiece of design, really.
Yeah.
The fact that it's based on this fairly straightforward chronograph mechanism, which in itself they're super things, but then to build onto it so much more work and still have the dial look fairly clean and fairly legible, in spite of the fact it's telling you all that information. It's great design on the outside and great engineering on the inside. And
it is a thing of beauty, I must say. I just find myself glancing at it regularly. It's quite remarkable. Not very many watches can do that for you. It's a bit like a car. Certain cars, if you own one and it's a thing of beauty, you're very happy looking at it. And I find myself just looking at that thing because it's beautiful. What do you remember what you did to it?
Yes, it was a complete service. Take everything to pieces, new mainspring, and with all watches when we're working on them, we probably go further than you'd get in a factory service centre.
Right.
Because we're obsessive about removing all the old oil.
Oh, I see.
And normally you take it to pieces, clean everything, wash everything. It goes through a very pronounced 4-stage cleaning process.
Right.
But what we tend to do is literally sharpen with a knife a tiny little bit of pegwood and just run that through each hole to make sure it scrapes off any hardened residue of oil that's been left in there.
And is that really important?
It is if you want the best performance and timekeeping out of it.
Fine.
And if you leave a little bit of old oil in there, it will be a bit less good, a bit scratchy perhaps. It's possible that can start to wear at the steel pivots.
Right.
And so you're starting to wear away bits of metal that, yes, a future repairer could fix. But at great time and significance. Whereas if you really service it properly, make sure it's sparklingly clean before you start to build it back together, you will know that you've done a good job. Because this watch should last for generations.
Well, it is one of those things, isn't it, that will be passed on from generation to generation.
Yeah,
and I think they get better. As they get a little bit of age. I mean, it still looks pretty sparkling new, but
it is, and that's one of the great beauties of 18-karat gold is, you know, it mellows, but it doesn't look old.
No,
it always keeps the same colour, tone, appearance. I myself prefer a watch that's a little bit worn to one that is absolutely blemish-free perfection. Because I find myself, if I put that on my wrist, I'm nervous of it.
Yes, that's a good point. Very good point. Yeah.
All the time. Like, oh gosh, I might scratch it. Oh gosh.
That's a good point.
Walk through doors with my arm behind my back.
Yeah.
Put my hand in my pocket.
Yeah.
Whereas this has just had a little bit of life about it.
Yeah.
It's been used and enjoyed.
And that's the important thing, isn't it, with these things? They need to be used and enjoyed. And if you do that, they last longer.
Yes.
It's ironic, isn't it? The more you use it, the better it is.
Yes.
Yeah. And 18-karat gold as opposed to 22-karat gold, which is the best?
Yeah, 22 has got more gold in it, so it costs more.
Yeah.
But actually, it's probably ever so slightly softer at that point.
Of course, yeah.
18, you can introduce some slightly harder metals into the alloy, into the other percentage, so that you've got a really nice, hard, firm, machinable material to work with.
Yeah.
And on this case, it's really important, because these pushers take a tremendous amount of wear. The winder itself takes a fair bit of wear.
Yeah.
So you want something that's nice to machine and hard.
Right, okay. And the only fault I can see with this watch after wearing it for a couple of weeks is that sometimes it stops and I've just got to shake it a bit and keep it going. I get the impression that it's been in a drawer for very many years.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you have any memory of the owner that brought it in, whether it was there. No, because you remember the things, don't you?
Yeah. And freshly serviced and all the rest of it, it should happily run for 30 odd hours.
Well, it is now, but when I first got it a couple of weeks ago, it was a bit temperamental. But I think the more I'm wearing it, and I went to bed with it one night, ever since I slept with it, it's become totally efficient. So again, it needs a winder.
A period of non-use.
It does. Yeah.
That it's sat, and when I was talking about the oils, if you imagine at its crudest level, if you got a teaspoon of vegetable oil, and left it out for 2 years, it would solidify.
Of course.
Just turn to toffee. And watch oils are much, much better, but they still do the same thing.
Right.
And watchmakers talk about stiction.
Right.
This idea that it's lubricated, but the lubrication can be part of the problem.
Right, okay.
And so if it's sat still and not doing anything for a year or two, then everything can get slightly stuck in one position.
Right.
And when it frees itself, it will free itself. The wheel will choke round until it's in exactly that same position again, and it might just
stagger a little bit. That's what I found, but it seems to be fine now.
Then once it's run for a few weeks, it will run significantly better. I know when we make our own watches, we see the same thing. People talk about the amplitude of the balance wheel, how far it swings around backwards and forwards whilst the watch is ticking. We can make a watch, lubricate it, put it on test. It might have amplitude of 280 degrees. You think, oh, that looks all right.
What does that mean, 280 degrees?
280 degrees is how far around the balance is swinging.
Okay.
The actual sort of little balance wheel.
I see, got you. Okay.
So 360 degrees.
Okay, so it's working really well. Yeah.
And you just run it and test it for a few days, and after a few days, you notice that actually it's increased significantly. Yeah. It's now 300 degrees.
Because it's happy, it's moving.
The oil's lubricating, the oil is moving around to all the places where it's most needed.
Okay, so keep them going. That's the top tip, I think, isn't it? How long was the watch here in your workshops?
It was a few weeks.
Yeah.
It was a big job to actually do the job, and then you need really, for a watch like this, you want a good fortnight's test before it goes back to the customer. Make sure that there are no faults, because from our point of view, if we're restoring or repairing watches, what we like to do is say, here it is with a 12-month guarantee,
of course,
and not hear from the customer again.
In the nicest possible way. You don't want to see them under those circumstances. The watch has stopped.
And if somebody brings it back 3 days later and says it's stopped, that makes us look a bit foolish.
Yeah, and it's more work you don't need to do. Yeah,
so it's a case of testing it. And one of the advantages of the big automatic watch winding machine we've got is it will find the strange position where the hands catch each other.
Oh, I see.
That you hadn't noticed when you were putting it together.
I love that bit of kit, I must say. It's very lovely.
Because, especially on a dial like this, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hands all passing around each other.
I see, so you've got to get it in different angles.
To make sure that everyone clears the others.
The only one that's a bit dicky is the year.
Yeah.
It seems to be fine one morning, then the next morning it's trying to change to 2031, then it comes back again. Is this just a quirk you have to live with a vintage watch?
It is. It's on a little sliding mechanism, and I imagine if you gave the watch a really stout thump onto something, it would probably flip over onto the next year.
It's just something you have to live with, isn't it?
It's a gentleman's watch. It's not made for thumping. You don't wear it whilst you're chopping logs.
It's so true. That's the perfect out. Remember that. Thanks, Robert.
It's not waterproof.
Oh, no, that's another point, actually.
Yeah.
If you bought a brand new IWC, the equivalent is £36,000.
Yeah.
That's going to be waterproof for a period of time.
Only for a very short period of time.
Right, okay.
The thing about waterproofing is it's very much like an MOT test. It's
a
moment-in-time test.
Okay.
Every time you change the date on this and press a pusher, you're scraping bits of metal and rubber against one another.
Okay.
Wear is taking place. It can very quickly go from it was waterproof when it was made to months or years down the line, it's no longer waterproof.
Shall we call them splash proof?
Yeah.
Splash proof.
At best.
That's it.
Yeah.
So remember, don't go deep sea diving in your vintage watch. Now, let's get it all set up and ready to go.
Yeah, Craig's in the middle of trying to set the calendar, which is in itself quite a demanding task that takes a while to figure out exactly which lever to pull to which position to turn in which direction to change either the day of the week or the date of the month or the month or the year or the moon dial.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, I looked at a YouTube video to try and do it myself, and I was confused within 7 seconds.
Yeah.
So luckily, we've got Craig here, who looks like he knows what he's doing.
He does, yeah. So yeah, they're complicated.
Yeah.
But when they're running, brilliant.
Yeah.
Just brilliant. It tells you every calendrical date you can need just glancing at your wrist.
Well, it is so complicated, but it's so interesting as well. It's one of those watches that I have found myself just staring at it, wondering what on earth is going on. The tick, is this normal actually, Robert, for the tick to change? The noise the watch makes, I've noticed, alters occasionally.
Yeah.
What's going on inside?
Well, when the calendar's actually driving, the watch mechanism is ticking around as normal, and then around about midnight, so for maybe an hour before, an hour after midnight, it's actually engaging with a whole series of little levers to move each of those things separately.
Right.
So it's engaging one lever to change the day of the week, another lever to change the day of the month, and so on.
So what you're saying is I should be asleep at 12 o'clock at night, not listening to the watch.
And what that takes a lot of power away from the watch mechanism.
Right.
And so when that happens, you will hear it ticking distinctly quieter than the rest of the time.
Right.
One of the reasons that watchmakers like calendars changing at midnight is the chances are that your watch will not be on your wrist, but it's going to be lying down on the bedside table, undisturbed by the outside world.
Right.
And it will quietly get through that difficult business of changing the calendar overnight.
And not bothering anybody.
Yes, yeah.
Now, what about the movement in that IWC itself?
Yeah. The movement is, I'd hate to say mass-produced because it's the wrong word. The movement is the Swiss 7750 automatic chronograph movement.
And how long's that been around for?
Oh, as long as I've been alive, I think.
Right.
It is an ancient, tried and tested design.
Yeah.
Still used by many big watch companies today.
Yeah.
Because it is so good.
Okay, so even though it's very complicated, it's a bomb-proof engine.
The engine is incredibly bomb-proof.
Yeah.
And also very well made, because this dates back to a time which is really at the beginning of quartz watches, or before quartz watches.
I see.
So when this was designed to be a proper precision timekeeper on your wrist, this was as good as it gets in terms of its performance.
Okay.
So these watches work very well and will keep time. Well, if a new one will keep time to a few seconds a day.
Yeah, I've been wearing it for about 2 weeks. I'm finding it loses a minute a week or something like that. But I think, you know, when you're wearing a vintage classic watch, it's like driving a vintage classic Rolls Royce or a Lamborghini. Yeah. It's going to have its little quirks, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And watchmakers are obsessed with oils and lubrication as well, because they change, and that's what makes them frustrating. When you put them in, they're quite wet and viscous. After 2 years, they've dried out a little bit. Okay,
so how often would a watch like that need to be serviced then?
I'd have thought realistically, if you wear it all the time, every 3 years perhaps.
Right.
If you wear it rarely, you could double that. So every 6 years perhaps.
And what about in the interim period? So would you suggest putting a complicated watch movement like that on this thing?
It might be the easiest way to look after it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got a perpetual calendar that if it runs down and stops, there's a tremendous amount of work to reset it. Yeah. Just keep it running all the time.
So when you go to bed, rather than putting it on the bedside table, put it on the automatic winder, and that will keep it happy. It's a bit like an old car.
It is.
The more you use it, the happier and more reliable it is.
Yeah. I used to have a couple of old Jaguars.
Yeah.
Always had trouble with them.
Yeah.
Everything going wrong. And so we got rid of one.
Yeah.
And I then only had one old Jaguar.
But you used it more often.
I used all the time.
Right.
And it became a very reliable vehicle.
There you go. So a watch like this IWC is something, it's likely that the person that owns that watch will probably have several other watches.
Yes.
So the thing to do is either wear the watch every day as your everyday watch, or don't put it in a drawer.
Leave it in an automatic watch.
Oh, no, that's it. So an investment of £100 is actually well spent.
Well worth it.
Yeah. And so then, final top tip, if you want to wear a vintage automatic watch, it's a jolly good idea to invest in an automatic winder. So whilst you're sleeping, the watch is moving, keeping it in tip-top condition. So before we say goodbye, here is one of Robert's watchmakers. This is a fascinating place. I could spend all day here, but I will be back because I will be making a little video about the watches Robert makes here from scratch, with all parts actually sourced and made in Britain. But before I go, how much do you think this vintage IWC Da Vinci complicated watch is worth? Remember, 36,000 and a bit, brand new. This one, did you get anywhere near? Leave me some comments down below. Priced £8,900. Until next time, cheerio.